Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Korra comic review. Today I'm going to be taking a look at the Legend of Korra Turf Wars Omnibus edition. So this is the basically smaller 3-in-1 collected edition of the Legend of Korra comic Turf Wars, which originally came out, of course, in Turf Wars Part 1, Part 2, Part 3 a bunch of years ago. It was then collected into a library edition, hardcover, big book, and now we have the smaller collected edition, the Omnibus, which we're going to take a look at now. So straight away, note on the release date. Today, November 16th, Wednesday, is the comic book store release date for this book. This is the actual release date the day I put this video live. The book is not out until December 27th everywhere else. This is a weird situation where some of the most recent Avatar and Korra comics have received delays, but only to the mass market date, meaning that they have not been, in this most recent batch of delays, delayed for comic book stores. So that's why we have this situation where the release dates are actually quite a long ways away, in that like if you don't have a local comic book store, you're going to have to wait like over a month to get this right at the end of December. So just be aware of that. If you want this book like now, immediately, find your local comic book store or an online comic store that actually ships places, and that's where you're going to be able to get it recently. If not, you will be waiting until December 27th. The same applies, let me just get this up here, to the most recent upcoming Korra comic, which is the next Dark Horse release, which is Legend of Korra Patterns in Time. This is a short story collection. It does have new content in it, as well as reprinting some of the older Free Comic Book Day books. So this is actually an exciting, important release. It's the only significant new content that Dark Horse have put out this year. This also is affected by the same thing. Its release date in comic book stores is going to be November 30th, but elsewhere, it's going to be December 20th, which obviously is a bit weird by itself, that this book, which is out now, has a longer gap to its mass market date than the book that's not out yet at all. It's a bit of a weird situation, but just be aware of that. If you want your Korra comics as soon as possible, comic book stores. Today for this one, Patterns in Time, November 30th. If not, December 20th for Patterns, and December 27th for this. Bit confusing, but that's Dark Horse for you in 2022. So that's the release date stuff. It's a bit different than we've usually had. Obviously, a few years ago, we used to have to be more aware of this, but in recent years, the comic book store release date and the mass market date have been in the same week, separated by one day. Mass market date is the Tuesday. Comic book store date is a Wednesday. Everyone gets it the same week. No problems whatsoever. Obviously, there's been some delays, and that's why we have this unusual situation. But yeah, Omnibus edition. A lot of people get confused by that if they're not familiar with comics and books and stuff like that, how they do collected editions. But like I said before, this book is effectively it just means that these three individual comics, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, are all in this one. That's why it's just called Turf Wars, and that's what an Omnibus edition pretty much always is. It's a collection of either series of books, or in this case, parts of the same series. And there are extras in this, which is the interesting comparison straight away, which is that I think you in terms of a buying decision, unless you're a hardcore collector who just wants everything Korra, I think you can, for the most part, ignore the fact that the individual parts, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, are available. Your buying decision is between these two books, because they are, in essence, the same. It's just form factor, basically, that is the difference. Do you want the big hardcover book that has all the story, has the extras and stuff like that, and will look really nice on your shelf, because Dark Horse make very good hardcover books? There is a different cover on this one as well, of course. It looks very nice. Or do you want the small, cheaper collected edition that has effectively the same content? It's a decision based on what style of collecting you actually want. If you just want the story, you go for this. If you are more of a collector and value the big book, you go for this. That's the difference, is that obviously this is more like $40, this is $25, and then you can see the difference in size right there. The pages in this comic are a decent bit bigger than they are here, so you know, for readability's sake, you know, this one is probably has the slight advantage, but I think this size is perfectly fine and readable. But just be aware of that. So yeah, before we get into like the direct comparison, like what's actually in this book, let's just take a look at the outside. So straight away, brand new cover for this, which is very nice, which is they brought Irene Coe back to do the cover for her own series, which is very nice. So you can see here Korra and Asami on the front, in the background, kind of bigger actually for some reason, Tokuga and Jargala. So you have sort of the heart of the book, which is the Korra-Asami kind of focused development, and then you have the plot of the book more back here, which is the triad turf war of the title in the background. So very cool, very fitting for the series. I like the colors and like the contrast of like the blues of the water and lightning, and then the spirit portal in the background is kind of nice. On the back, this is just sort of like an edited together use of like a background from one scene with an image from another scene, but just representing that, hey, there's going to be some Korra-Asami stuff in here. So if you like that relationship, this comic is basically where you get most of the content with them. Otherwise, standard blurb briefly describing kind of what it is. It just says that like, yeah, official continuation of Legend of Korra. It collects Turf Wars Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3 with an all new cover. And that's exactly the situation there. As for inside, oh, actually, the spine image. The reason I nearly skipped past it is because there's nothing really to say. It doesn't look like they are planning to do anything with the spines of these books. It's a pretty standard one, Turf Wars Omnibus, and then you can see there is an image, but it is just a little Korra image. They're not trying to make anything big out of it, otherwise they would have used more of the spine ultimately. And the reason I bring that up is because if you're unfamiliar with Omnibus editions, the Avatar Omnibus editions, on that side of things, when they released their comics in omnibus format, they did make it so that each part had a section of an overall image that combined together makes something bigger. So you can see here they have the image more, the title more up at the top, and they leave a massive amount for the spine image. That is obviously very different than here, where they just put the title in the middle, tiny little image on the bottom, which is basically like they usually do their kind of individual parts. And that makes sense. There are only 2 Korra comic series out, and that is Turf Wars and then Runes of the Empire. And we know with the future of the comics, it seems like we are only, at least for the next couple of years, only going to be getting one-shot comics and short stories, meaning it doesn't seem like there's going to be any direct sort of continuation after Runes of the Empire. In the same way that for Avatar comics, it doesn't seem like we're really getting any continuation after Imbalance. A little bit unfortunate, but hopefully as Avatar Studios builds up more and more, we'll see more of what their plan actually is. Briefly on that topic of Runes of the Empire, is Runes of the Empire going to get a release like this, an Omnibus edition? Yes, let me just get it up here. So you can see here, Runes of the Empire Omnibus, it's already been like solicited and stuff like that. You can pre-order it. It's currently scheduled for April 2023. So not crazy far into the future, but it is a book for next year. And as you can see, they have a Michelle Wong brand new cover, and otherwise it will be the same format and style of book as this. But just be aware, they have already confirmed the next one. So if you're at all worried that they'll just do this, they won't do the other one, no, both are confirmed. The only omnibus we're waiting to hear about is if they do an Imbalance omnibus, which hopefully we'll hear about at some point soon. Hopefully. It is Dark Horse we're talking about here. Now, finally, let's get into the book. So, like I said earlier, it's basically just a smaller version of the library edition, which means that all of the extras in that book are here. there's a very weird minor difference that I don't think will affect things for people, which I'll get into in a second, but just to make it clear that the extras at the start of the book, for instance, the foreword by Mike DiMartino is here. It's in the omnibus. The introduction on the following page by Irene Coe is here as well. And then at the back of the book, you do get the full process sketchbook. The whole thing is here. So like concept art stuff from throughout the book, all of the pages are here. You're not missing any art overall. So in terms of direct just content, it's all here. Meaning that unlike the Avatar transition from library editions into omnibus edition, where there is the kind of somewhat significant difference of the annotations from the library edition not being in the omnibus, because the Turf Wars hardcovers never had, the Korra hardcovers never had annotations, it means there's basically very little to be lost. The thing that is missing though, let me just sort of like try and point this out. Again, it's a pretty minor thing that I only kind of just noticed just before coming to record this video, is in the transition basically between parts of the comic, they do it slightly kind of differently. Whereas like, this is the hardcover now. When you get to the end of Turf Wars Part 1 and you go into Part 2, you get a clean version of the cover of Part 2 before it begins. So you get that art there, they note that it's actually kind of present. And that's kind of like, oh cool, so I know I'm going into the second book. In the omnibus, they don't have that. It just literally goes from the direct like end of one comic into the other, and they just don't have that page with the cover on it. They don't collect the covers at the back like the Avatar ones do, because like I showed you, you go directly from last page into sketchbook, whereas for instance, say, the Avatar omnibus editions, what you get is last page of the book, cover for The Promise Part 1, turn the page, cover for Part 2 and Part 3. So you kind of miss out on the Part 1, Part 2, Part 3 like images throughout the book basically. And that might just be a factor of the Korra comics have a lengthier sketchbook than the Avatar comics typically do. So to keep the page count the same or whatever, they might have just cut out those pages to make it even or something like that. I have a feeling it's probably something like that. That's what happened. But again, like I said, that is a very, very minor point that most people won't particularly notice. And I doubt anyone will be like, not buying the book because it doesn't feature those cover transition pages. Because in a way, like that's kind of part of the whole omnibus thing, is just to kind of highlight that we're finally putting them all together and not really making much of a distinction between the parts. But like I said, otherwise, it's all here. This is a situation where it is effectively an identical book to previously. The only other minor difference is just that obviously because of when these books came out, they use Vivian Ing, whereas they go by Killian Ing now, and that is reflected in like the credits in their credits in Runes of the Empire. They have corrected that here, as you can see just there. You can see it says Killian Ing. So just one of those things, like they paid attention to detail on that, and that's nice to see. Otherwise, like I said, it's effectively the same. So going back to it again, your buying decision should effectively be between, do you want to pay full price, $25 for the smaller, cheaper version, or do you want to pay in or around $40 for the big hardcover collected edition? That's really all that there is here. And I like that in a way, it's a much simpler decision than it is with the Korra ones, where you have to the Avatar ones, where you have to factor in the annotations. This time you don't, and it's just up to hardcover, softcover, and size. That's it. Now, very briefly, if you do want some thoughts on Turf Wars as a story, it's a bit of an interesting one, of course, because, of course, a lot of people love Korra and stuff like that. This is the comic where you finally get to see that developed. If you felt like they didn't get development in the show, well, here's the comic where we actually get to see that in focus. And that's definitely the kind of highlight of the book. You can tell a lot of effort was put into it. It does mean, though, that in my opinion, the kind of main plot, the actual Turf Wars thing, is not the most interesting. Like, I don't find Tokuga to be the most fascinating villain overall, because he just sort of gets introduced as like, hey, I've united the triads, and it's like, oh, so we're heavily simplifying the whole triad situation by just making the triple threats, you know, every other triad except the creeping crystals, more or less. And I feel there was a little bit of depth to go into if needed, and the backstory for Tokuga isn't particularly strong. I'm not gonna mind whenever Tokuga comes back, because it's heavily implied that like he's going to at some point reappear, and they could do something with him there. The whole, you know, getting into a little bit of spoilers here, you know, the whole spirit morphing thing that happened to him is interesting, but I don't feel they use it that well in the book, and I'd actually like to see more of an exploration of how he feels being a spirit morphed character, as opposed to just in this book it felt like he just used the power that sort of granted him, and nothing else particularly mattered. You know, there's a little bit, the whole Wan Young Kum thing gives Asami like a little bit of focus, but obviously the kind of frustration there is that it still didn't feel like Asami herself quite got the focus that she perhaps needed, which is why everyone, I think, wants to see Asami get a solo book to sort of like even out the relationship a little bit, because Korra's like the most developed character in the entire show. And then Asami, despite being a main character, feels like there's so much we still need to kind of learn and know about her in terms of how she feels about things. And that definitely could do with a little bit of work. The way I'd say it is that Turf Wars is a very solid comic. I think very little of it is going to sort of like blow you away with how incredible it is. But if you're a big shipping fan of Korra and Asami, there's some good stuff here. It's just that the plot is a little bit like, it addresses what it needs to do. It sort of tackles some things. Presidential plot's kind of interesting. But the second Korra comic, Ruins of the Empire, I find to be a little bit more notable. It tries to be a little bit more ambitious, and I'll always praise a book for trying to have that ambition and actually do something that matters in one of these comics. Yes, it kind of in a way tries to do something big, doesn't quite get it right, but I value that, I think, a little bit more than not trying to do all that much, but still not kind of doing anything crazy amazing. So Korra comics are in this weird spot where, like, I think across the two that we got, I don't think we ever quite got the kind of be all end all, like, this comic is just really strong and amazing, like I think we kind of had with a lot of the early Avatar comics. Like, I think there's people will debate you over The Promise, but I think The Promise is very good. The Search is obviously the one that people really go in on. I think The Rift is really solid as well. The Search and The Rift especially, I think, just are excellent comics, excellent Avatar stories, and I don't have too many complaints with them. Whereas this one is just like, it's a little bit low key for the big build up to the first ever Korra comic set after the events of the series. Still good, and it's probably gotten a little bit better over time and stuff like that, but it does highlight that Korra comics have had a little bit of a rough kind of run of things, because like if you remember the entire history of this, when they were first announced, they had a completely different artist. Something happened there, they had to change artists, and it felt like that put the whole project back by basically an entire year. Turf Wars, as it came out, was a heavily delayed series. I think all 3 parts got quite heavily delayed. It felt like we were finally on track with Ruins of the Empire, and then basically Avatar Studios kind of happened and has meant that we can't really progress the story anymore, and are now waiting to see how they do Korra one-shot comics going forward, which I'm excited for the Mako comic because he, of all the characters, I think most needs some development. But it does highlight a bit of a messy run of things for the Korra comics, that, you know, they have effectively 6 omnibus editions to do for Avatar, but for Korra they only have 2 across quite a few years of Korra comics existing. And I think it speaks to, you know, something somewhere along the line went a little bit wrong, and we probably should have had at least 1 more, if not maybe 2. So just keep that in mind. But anyway, to bring this video to an end, that's been pretty much everything there is to say about the Turf Wars Omnibus Edition. In the comments, if you have anything to ask me about the book, or anything to say about it if you've got it yourself, your thoughts on the Omnibus format, on Turf Wars itself, definitely let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.